We are learning Sikha Aleph, Parshas Terumah, Chelek Chaf Aleph. We are learning this morning Le'ilui Nishmas Chana Bas Ephraim, her neshama shehaven aliyah, and we're asking for a refuah shalema for Harav Yosef Yitzchak ben Sima Chasya. Aleph. Kvar nisbar kama v'chama pa'amim. The Rebbe says it's already been explained numerous times. B'negei l'shemas haparshios, pursuant to the names of each parsha. She'af al pi shebepashto shma shel kol parsha hu al shem haschalasa, that although it would seem, simply speaking, that the name of each parsha is based on the beginning of the parsha. But the Rebbe says, but once we realize that this is the minhag Yisrael, this is the custom of Jews to name the parshas in this particular way, uminhag Yisrael terahi, and we are taught that a minhag is Torah, u'b'Torah kol hanyonim heim b'tachlis hadiuk, and within Torah, everything is exquisitely specific. Hare muvan sheshma shel kol parsha parsha mivate es hatochen hamiyuchad shel parsha zu. Then it's once you emerge from that point of departure, that everything is extremely specific and nothing is just perchance. So we understand that the name of each parsha expresses the specific content of that parsha, and it's not just that we conveniently just cherry pick one of the first words of the parsha, but that there's something much more profound happening there. And is understood also from the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. In general, for the Baal Shem Tov taught us about everything in the world. So the Rebbe is saying how much more so when it comes to the name of the parsha. Asher shmoi asher yikru loy b'lashon hakodesh hu chayusay shel hadavar u'memela merames hu al technei. Baal Shem Tov taught that the name that is given to something in lashon hakodesh, in the holy tongue, is actually its vivifying force. And once you understand that, you understand that the name alludes to the content of what you're talking about, that it's not arbitrary. In every other language, names are arbitrary. So right now, I'm assuming, all of us sitting on chairs, but they could easily have been called tangerines, and there'd be no violence done to the concept of a chair. But at some arbitrary time by some arbitrary people, it's called a chair. But the Baal Shem Tov taught that the name in Lashon HaKodesh actually encapsulates the essence of whatever it is that you're talking about. The Inyan Zeh, and this idea, Sheshem HaParsha, Eina Rak L'Simana Ba'alma, that the name of the parsha is not just an arbitrary designation. Muchachu Gam Mishem Parshas Terumah. So this thesis, this idea, this theory is proven from the name of our Parsha Terumah. Im ne'amar sheshem haparsha rak al shem haschalasa. If you want to say that the name of each parsha is simply one of the words at the very beginning of the parsha, Ella shechivan shehashem tzarich l'seis heker ben parsha lechaverta l'chein al pirayv efshar linkot l'tzarich Hashem es hateva rishona or hatevas harishona is mama shel kol parsha. In the brackets, the Rebbe says, but because the name has to delineate this parsha and distinguish it from another, therefore, very, very often, even most often, the name of the parsha is not going to be the first or the second word mamish of the parsha. Why? Ki b'chama parshas heim shavos, because the very first words of the parsha might be the same in more than one parsha. Ula dugma, for example, the Rebbe says, Eila Teilis. Eila Teilis appears in more than one parsha at the very beginning. Or Vayemer Hashem, or Hashem said, and so on and so forth. Meaning that it's not, you might think that it's still kind of arbitrary, but you don't take the very first, second, third word because it's not enough of a distinguishing marker. So therefore, the Rebbe says, according to this theory, Va'al Kain, and therefore, because you need to distinguish one from the other, and you're looking for something distinct, therefore you have to cite a different word, which is pretty close to the beginning of the parsha, but not the first words. And by doing that, you'll be able to distinguish between this parsha and other parshas. But the Rebbe says, if this is your working theory, but in accordance with this way of thinking, this parsha should not have been called Terumah. It should have been called V'yikchu, and you should take. Teva haksuva lefanea, v'akrova yoseh laschalos haparsha. The word V'yikchu is written before the word Terumah, and it's closer to the beginning of the parsha. Umizem muvan, and from this is understood, shahatam shahaparsha nekreis b'shem Terumah, that the reason that the parsha is called Terumah, hu lo rak kedei l'samein b'kach es haparsha lavdila mishar parshas, is not only to distinguish this parsha and to differentiate between this parsha and the other parshas, but rather because this name, in our case, Terumah, expresses the content of the parsha. It encapsulates the general theme of this parsha and the way in which it's different from all other parshas. And we have to understand. So the Rebbe says, okay, now that's what you're saying, we have a problem. In addition to the fact that the word Terumah does not, in fact, express, it would seemingly, the content of the parsha. The Rebbe says, like I'm going to unpack in the next sif. Hine yetal kain, but even more so, Indian di Terumah einay chidush b'parsha zu dafka. The idea of a Terumah, of an offering to Hashem, is not novel to this parsha specifically. Sherei yeshnam kama b'nei Terumah, because there are many different types of things that are set apart for Hashem. Ubelashon Chazal, like the Gemara taught, Esa Trumasein. There are 10 Trumas. There are 10 things that are set apart. Ubeparshaseinu niskar min echot shel Truma bilvad. And in our parsha, only one type of Truma is mentioned. Ha-Truma lemelachas hamishkan, that which the Jews had to set apart from their assets for the construction of the Mishkan. And in parentheses, the Rebbe says, "Vafilu lefi drashas Chazal," and even if, in accordance with what our Chazal taught in the Gemara, and Rashi cites it, Hare rak gimel trumas amuras kan, that there were actually 3 trumas that are mentioned here, but still, it's gimel, it's 3 out of 10. Ubefrat shetruma stam hi truma hanisenes l'kayin. And specifically because when you use the word truma, the first place that your mind goes is to the truma, that particular offering that would be given to the kohen. Ve'im kain, and if so, ech efshar loymar shahashem truma noise b'teicha es teichna hamiyuchad shel kol parsha zu. And so once you understand that there are 7 other trumas at least that are mentioned elsewhere in the Torah, so the preponderance of truma are not mentioned in this parsha. And the term truma in general makes your mind go to what was given to the kohen, not what was given from your gold and silver to build a Mishkan. So how is it possible to say that the word truma actually encapsulates the very unique content of our parsha? B'shah she'inin hatruma truma stam nadun beparshas acher shebetorah. B'yesarichos, masha trumas hamishkan parshas truma. And specifically because the Indian, the general concept of truma is dealt with in other parshas and is dealt with at greater length than truma is dealt with in our parsha. Base. The oid, and on top of that, the pashtos, simply speaking, hatoichen hamiyuchat beparsha zuhu hatzibui al meleches asiyas ubinyan hamishkan. It would seem, very simply speaking, that the distinguishing factor of the content in our parsha is the commandment to create, to fashion, to make, to build the Mishkan. Seemingly, and seemingly it seems that this idea of fashioning or making the Mishkan is not found included in the term Truma. Truma seems hamayra rak al ha'afrasha b'hanadava shel Yisrael letzerech hamishkan. The term Truma seems to speak and teach rather about the separation of and the donation of assets on the part of Bnei Yisrael for the purpose of building the Mishkan. Avoloi alasias hamishkan va'asuli mikdash, but it doesn't seem to be speaking about constructing the Mishkan. The famous words va'asuli mikdash v'imkein ech efshar loymar shataychen aparsha asiyas hamishkan nimtza b'teres truma. And so, how is it possible to opine, to state a theory that the construction of the Mishkan is encapsulated in the word truma? And the question is actually even greater than this. Seemingly, now the Rebbe is asking a question not only on the name, but on the order of the psukim in our parsha. It would seem that the parsha should have led with the words of Asuli Mikdash, and you shall construct for me a mishkan, you should make for me a mikdash, asher hu hanekuda hayisoid b'hakdam l'cholat sivurim parsha, because these words are, in fact, it would seem, the basis and the preface to all of the other commandments in the parsha. Ubechlal zeh gam hatziva v'yikli truma, inclusive also of the command to take truma from Bnei Yisrael, shehu l'tzayach ki hatziva v'asuli mikdash, because it's only by collecting these materials that you can fulfill the commandment of building the mikdash. V'im kain. And so, if this is the way it should have been, if we understand it so, it should have first said, Hashem spoke to Moshe, tell Bnei Yisrael, v'asuli mikdash, they should make me a mikdash. And only after you present the central commandment of the whole parsha, then should have been written the commandments that delineate how you fulfill this commandment, practically speaking. And one of those would have been v'yikoli truma, you should take from me an offering, nidvas hamishkan, that will be donated to the Mishkan. And that would have been followed with the details about how you build the Mishkan. But from the fact that the psukim lead in the way that they do, that first it says, V'yichali truma, you shall take from me an offering. And only this prefaces Lepasuk v'asuli mikdash, and only afterwards, as it's saying, you shall make for me a holy home, mashma lahefech. So from this we understand the opposite. Shahateva truma, that indeed and in fact the term truma mivatas es teichen inyan hamishkan yoisem asher kosu v'asuli mikdash, that the word v'yicholi truma, and specifically truma, that pasuk, they shall take from me an offering, expresses the central theme of the Mishkan more than the words V'asuli Mikdash. V'yasera mizu, and even more, l'ch'ayra, seemingly Inyan HaMishkan hu hefach inyan Truma. It would seem that the idea of the Mishkan is opposite the idea of Truma. How so? Inyanoi shel HaMishkan hu kishmai al shem b'shechanti b'seicham. The name Mishkan, which literally means the dwelling or the resting place, is called, we call it that way because it's etymologically rooted in the word v'shachanti b'soichem, I will rest amongst you. Hainu, meaning lo yasiyas hamishkan v'asuli mikdash ela hashraz hashchina b'toich hamishkan. The word mishkan seems to connote not what the Jews will do v'asuli mikdash, but rather what Hashem will do. Hashem says, I will rest amongst you. V'chol zman shadayin lo niskayim b'mishkan v'shachanti. The hashchina dayin eina nikra mishkan lamitasei. And for as long as there is no v'shachanti, meaning that the Shechina has not yet rested, af shekvar nishlam habinyan kulim, going back to the parentheses, even though the whole structure is complete, but if Hashem's Shechina is not resting there, eina nikra mishkan lamitasei, it's not called a mishkan. So Truma speaks to what the Jews are doing. Mishkan speaks to what Hashem is doing. So seemingly, again, calling the Parsha Truma, which the Rebbe says it must be called this, because the Torah leads with V'yichuli Truma. So somehow Truma is even more important than Mishkan. But the difficulty is that it seems to be antithetical ideas. They seem to be opposite ideas. V'hashras hashchina sheba Mishkan eina yechola liyas nefelas alya ella al yedei ritzayna v'koyachai hakol yacha. And the resting of Hashem's presence in the Mishkan can only be effectuated through the will and the koyach of the all-powerful. And how Shlomo Melech said, Hine hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yichal kalucha af ki habayis hazeh. In Melachim, we learned that Shlomo Melech said that the heavens and the heavens, meaning the highest supernal realms, are unable to contain you. Only this home can contain you. Shehi tmiya kayemes. This is an ongoing wonder. We grapple with this. Sheshchinaso yisbarach habilti mugbeles, that the infinite Shechina of Hashem, asher hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim koilel olamais elyonim lo yichal kalucha, nimsheches v'shoira v'sheichenes b'vayezeh, that all of the heavenly realms, including the highest heavenly realms, cannot contain Hashem, but Hashem will be able to rest in this house. Shebazem mudgash. So in Shlomo HaMelech's expression and question, it's underscored. Shahadavar yachal liyas nifal rak mitzad koicha yisbarach habilti mukbal. That such a thing can only happen through the infinite, unending koyach of the one who is infinite. And of course, this could never occur through the agency of a human being down here below. So that's about the term Mishkan. Masha Enkein, in contradistinction, Perushay v'teichna shel teva truma, the definition and the content of the term truma, asher adraba, on the contrary, madgisha lo yesashraz v'amshachas elokuz b'mikdash haba mitzad lamayla, it doesn't speak to and it doesn't underscore the resting of Hashem's presence in the Mishkan that comes from above. Ella es asiyas ha'adam bazeh, but rather it speaks to man's overture. The yeser al kain, and even more than just pointing out that this speaks to man's overture as opposed to what Hashem does. B'tevas truma loy mikdash, but by citing, by highlighting the word truma and not mikdash, eina mirumezes afilu kabbalas hatruma al yedei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'ofen shenasis shaloi. It doesn't even allude to the way in which Hashem accepts this truma and the way in which this offering becomes Hashem's. Elarak hafrashas ha'adam levat. It highlights and focuses on the way in which a person separates something that belongs to him. That's what the focus is on. So the Rebbe is saying, on one hand, the word truma, because the pasuk v'yichali truma comes before va'asuli mikdash. So it seems that we have to understand from this that truma in some way encapsulates the content of this parsha in a way that va'asuli mikdash doesn't at all. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, the term truma seems to be focused directly on what a person is doing. But the whole idea of the Mishkan, which seemingly that's the whole idea of this parsha, is actually about the impossible for us to understand concept that the infinite creator of all, that cannot be contained by the entire universe and all of the supernal realms, should somehow be able to rest in this house. So it speaks to Hashem's overture, distinctly and uniquely so. And so again, what does the word truma teach us here? How is this the distinguishing factor of this week's parsha? Gimel. B'yuvam bahakdim she'ela klolas be'inyan. And we'll understand this by prefacing with a general question concerning this idea. L'shema misaperes hater ba'arichas hachi gdoila al dvar trumas hamishkan asiyas karshi hamishkan hayrias b'chule. This was the question that plagued me in 4th and 5th grade. Why does the Torah relate in such excruciating detail about all the materials that had to be given, and making all the aspects of the Mishkan, the boards and the curtains, etc. Though those were very difficult psukim and Rashis to go through. I'm still traumatized. Val derech she'elas Chazal, and like the Chazal asked, "My dehava hava, whatever happened, happened. It happened. Okay, the Mishkan was built. It happened." Halei b'Torah atzma nemar shehamishkan hu aroi, and the Torah itself tells us that the Mishkan was built for a temporary time. It was transient. K'moshe nemar ve'eya mishalech ba'oyel u'b'mishkan, and I will walk with you in the tent and in the Mishkan. Both transient. And this was a commandment for a very particular time. Like the Torah itself says, that this was necessary because you did not come until this time to your inheritance and to the place that you will rest in. And now compare and contrast this with the commandments that would be for all time regarding the Beis HaMikdash, the Batei Mikdash in Yerushalayim. That is referred to as Beis Olamim, an everlasting home. Ve'im kain, and if so, so once we understand that the Mishkan is in a sense a placeholder, it's just to fill a gap why is it so necessary and why is it so relevant to delineate all of the details of the Mishkan so that Bnei Yisrael should learn this at all times, in all places. Even after the Mishkan was hidden away, and in its place, a Beis Hamikdash was built. So why so much emphasis? It's one thing when you're talking about the story and the laws regarding the building of the Batei Mikdash. Although they too were destroyed, but we still need to be very attentive to these laws, and we need to keep learning them and relearning them, because we need to know this pursuant to the mikdash that will be built speedily in our days in the future. Because in the main, for the most part, the way in which the Bayis Shlishi will be built is based on the way the first Batei Mikdash were built. Okay, it's one thing about the Batei Mikdash, but why do we need to know all the details about the Terumah and the construction of the Mishkan? Yisera mizu, even more so. B'negei el Beis Hamikdash, Hari Kriyas v'limud Partei Binyan Abayis, Einam rak hachana b'achshara lebinyan la'asid. The Rebbe says when it comes to the Batei Mikdash, it's not only that we learn this as a preparation for the building in the future, maybe now. Because when it will be built in the future, we have to base it on what was built in the past. But the Rebbe says it's more. There's another reason. Ela yeser al kain. Al yedei kriyas v'limut suras habayis hine k'divrei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ani mala aleim kilu hima'iskim b'binyan habayis. But we're taught, and the Rambam brings this down, that when we read about it and when we learn about the details of the structure, when we learn about the architectural details, then Hashem says, I reckon it upon you as if you're actually building the bayis. O Kabir Chazal, and like Chazal explained, and the Chazal taught that through learning constantly the details of the Beis Hamikdash, how it was constructed, we effectuate that the house of Hashem should not be abnegated. It should not in a spiritual sense, and that means in the most profound sense, it's not destroyed. But what are we speaking about? But all of these very special teachings about what is accomplished through learning the details is regarding the Beis Hamikdash. Because it's a mitzvah for every generation to build a Beis Hamikdash. It's only that practically speaking, we can't unfortunately build it, but the mitzvah belongs to us. But a contradistinction, Hamishkan, the whole commandment to build a Mishkan was only for that particular generation. So now the Rebbe is deepening the question, right? We started with a question about trying to understand how our parsha is called Terumah. Then the Rebbe deepened that by saying, and why is that pasuk even before the word va'asuli mikdash? Especially because Terumah seems to be the opposite of Mishkan. Terumah seems to underscore human overture. Mishkan is about what Hashem does, because only Hashem can turn a structure, no matter how beautiful it is, no matter what it's made of, into a place where Hashem's presence can rest. But now the Rebbe says, in order to understand this, in order to answer the question, we first have to ask a more general question. We have to step back and ask, what are we obsessing over the Mishkan for to begin with? It's one thing if you're talking about the Beis Hamikdash, that is a commandment for every generation. But the Mishkan was just something temporary, it would seem, built as a stopgap measure until Bnei Yisrael can go into Eretz Yisrael. And there they'll build the everlasting edifice. Dalet. The Rebbe says, seemingly, we might be able to answer this question based on what has been discussed elsewhere at great length. That the command, you shall make for me a holy structure, and I will rest within it, within them, like Rashi like we learned famously that because it should have said b'teichai. So Rebbe says that we've discussed elsewhere that that although these words were said specifically about building the Mishkan, but actually these words are a more general commandment for all generations to build a house for Hashem. Tzivui al kol batei hamikdashes, that these words, although said about the Mishkan, are really a commandment regarding all of the batei mikdash, koilal hamikdash del asid, inclusive of the third Beis Hamikdash. Hainu, meaning shat tzivui al kol batei hamikdashes nilmad mirat tzivui al binyan hamishkan. So what this means is that we learn about building all the other holy structures for Hashem from the building of the Mishkan. Zeis va'id, and even more. Although the architectural structure of the Beis Hamikdash and the details of its length and width were very different than the Mishkan, but the main aspects of those Batei Mikdash were built on the same model of what was in the Mishkan. Kimavor b'Rambam, like the Rambam explained. And in like fashion, we learn from the commandment that the Jews had to give a truma, that they had to donate to the Mishkan. We learn the same regarding the Batei Mikdash. And in the words of the Rambam, Asher hakol chayavin livnois u'lisaid ba'atzman u'b'mainam anoshim v'noshim, that all Jews have to build and support the construction of the Batei Mikdash by themselves with their own money, both men and women. Ulefizem muvan. And so it's understood. Shagam hakriya v'halimudim lechas hamishkan noigim lebeis hamikdash u'misayim sheyia binyanei kidiboi. So we understand that reading this parsha, learning about the construction of the Mishkan is relevant to the Batei Mikdash and helps us in building it properly. Via Mizu, and even more, Yesh Loimar, we might say, Al Kol Panim B'Pnimius Inyanim, at least on the innermost level, Masha B'Poel HaYahadavar Ba'Ofen Zeh Shebetchila Nivna HaMishkan Lafi Sha'a. We might say that while practically things unfurled in this way, that first there was a Mishkan, which was for a transient moment. It was for that time where the Jews had not yet come to Israel, El Hamnucha Vel Nachala, to rest in their place of inheritance. And only after that were built the Batei Mikdash that were eternal. Seder v'oifen kiyum hamitzvah. The Rebbe says that it's because this is the order in which this mitzvah should be done. Min hakal el hakaved. Literally, this means from the light to the heavy, meaning you start with something less important and go to more important, or you go from something easier to something more difficult. Betchila mishkan, oyel aroi. You begin with the mishkan, which is a temporary tent, and not with something that is in a particular place. It's almost like you build a model just to make sure you know what you're doing, and that's a temporary model. And then you come from that to build a house that is solidified in a particular place and is eternal. Beis ha'elam b'Yerushalayim. It's the eternal house for Hashem in Yerushalayim. And this is learned also and is relevant to learning and reading about the actual structure. In order to effectuate completely this idea that when you learn, it's as if you're actually building it. So just like we said earlier, that regarding the Beis Hamikdash, it says that if you're learning about it, it's as if you're building it. So the Rebbe is saying, we might say that in order to fulfill that instruction, that when you're learning about it, it's as if you built it, you first have to learn about the construction of the Mishkan. It's not enough to just learn about the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. You have to learn about the construction of the Mishkan. Inclusive of even the details of the Mishkan that were not replicated in the Batei Mikdash. And only afterwards, Nitan Yeh Lifoil Al Yedei Hakriya B'Tzoras Habayis Es Inyan Animala Aleim Ki'ilu Hem Oiskin B'Vinyan Habayis. And only in this way, by starting first with learning all the details of the Mishkan, can you fulfill this idea that when you learn, Hashem says, I will reckon it, it will compute before me as if you actually built the Mishkan, the Mikdash. But the Rebbe says, Aval tirud ze einay maspik. The word ze is missing. But this explanation is not enough. The Rebbe says this does not satisfy the question we asked as to why is it necessary to learn all the details of the Mishkan. Because the Torah is eternal. But to say that the Mishkan was some kind of a placeholder, a stopgap measure, no. The Torah is eternal. That means that every aspect thereof is eternal. So if there was a time and there was a situation in which the Mishkan stood and there was a commandment that you should make the Mishkan, Sarach Loimar, we have to say, Shagam Inyan Zen Nitzchihu. Then we have to say that this too is eternal. It's not just a prelude. It's not just a segue. It's not just leading us into what is important. No, this in itself is important and eternal. And that there is a spiritual parallel to this situation. That we have lessons to learn from the existence of the Mishkan, from the building of the Mishkan, as it is unto itself, and not as a preface, as a preparation for building the Mishkan. And if you look at footnote 43, in that ha'ara, the Rebbe says, ubefrat, and especially, shagam kipshutai, that also, simply speaking, physically, ha-mishkan hu nitzchi, the Mishkan is actually eternal. V'loi necharav kebate mikdash, and it was not destroyed like the bate mikdash were, v'rak nignas. It was just hidden away. V'yasera mizu, and even more so, Amar Razal, our rabbis taught, and the Rebbe says, we're in the Gemara, our sages taught, ala pasuk atze shitim oimdim, and the words, and the acacia tree stood, she'oimdim la'olam ula'olmei olamim, that they stand forever and ever, sheyeshuvu, that they will return. So then there must be lessons that we learn from the Mishkan that are not just a preparation for the Mikdash. And so we're back to asking our question. And our question again was, why does the Torah tell us in such excruciating detail about the Mishkan? So first we thought, the Rebbe said, maybe you could say, it's because we have a mitzvah to learn all the details about building a Beis HaMikdash. And that when we learn these details, it's as if we're constructing it, actually. And in order to fulfill this dictum, that by learning it is as if you're fulfilling it, you first have to learn all the details of the Mishkan also. That's part of how you fulfill this idea of building the Beis HaMikdash, which is a tzivur l'dayros, which is a commandment that every Jew has forever and ever. But the Rebbe says, not accepting this. Because the Mishkan is not just an appendage. It's not just, okay, the Jews had not yet come to Israel, so they couldn't build the Beis HaMikdash where it should be built, and therefore they had to build a Mishkan. No, the Rebbe says, the inyan of a Mishkan is eternal.
Rivky,
yeah,
just a quick question, and maybe there's no answer. What I'm struggling with is the Mishkan stood for at least as long as the first Beis HaMikdash and at least as long as the second Beis HaMikdash. So, you know what I mean? It's
so
I think it was even longer. I think this is 410 years, it's 420. I don't know the exact numbers. I think from the time the Mishkan was built until Shlomo Melech, it was available and they used it.
So I think the inyan of Arai, of the temporary nature that the Rebbe is underscoring here, is not how long, but the way in which it was built. And like, I always just teach my kids like Lego, so like you don't build a house out of Lego, like it was not built to be bikvios.
Right. Even in Eretz Yisrael, it was moved around. Even in Eretz Yisrael, okay, again, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. On the other hand, the Rebbe says, but look here, the Mishkan, in when you compare it to the Batei Mikdash, the Mishkan actually is still existing. The Batei Mikdash were destroyed.
That is true. Everything.
But the Mishkan itself is just hidden.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. What?
When you think they had to keep moving it, I mean, some places they stayed for such a short time. They had to know the details inside out. They had to do it very quickly sometimes.
Yeah, that's all good and fine, but why do we have to know the details?
Wow. Maybe the Rebbe will answer that.
Yeah.
Sure he will.
Okay. Hey, Vabir Bazeh, and the explanation. B'negei lizman hashras hashchina lamata matzinu b'midrashim beis deis. When it comes to when did Hashem's Shechina, 'come down to rest in this lower earthy realm, we find in the Midrashim two two opinions. In one place, we have the idea that Hashem's Shechina came down during Matan Torah, that this was affected through Matan Torah. She'az batal gezerah rishayna va'amar hatachtainim yalu l'elyonim v'elyonim yordu l'tachtainim va'ani hamaschil shenemar va'yered Hashem al Har Sinai. We have a very, very, very famous medrash that until Matan Torah there was a gezerah, that what was below on the terrestrial and the earthy realm could not go above, could not go towards heaven, and the heavenly realm could not saturate the lower realm. But after Matan Torah, hatachtonim yalu l'elyonim, the lower realm can be elevated above, heavenward, and heaven and the above came down to below. And the Eibusha says, "Va'ani hamaschil," and I will initiate, I will start, like it says, first by Yered Hashem al Har Sinai. Uksiv, and then it says, Vel Moshe Amar Alei el Hashem. And only then does it say that did Hashem say to Moshe, come up. Ubamakam Acher Amar Chazal. So that's in one place. And in another place, Chazal taught, a Masai Shorsa Hashchina Ba'aretz, B'yoim Shehu Kam HaMishkan. Elsewhere we learn that Hashem Shechina came down on the day that the Mishkan was erected. And the Rebbe says, Umuvan, it's understood, Demar Amar Chada, Umar Amar Chada, B'loi Plige. Although one says like this and one says like that, they're not arguing. Hashras Hashchina b'matan Torah Haisem epnei shani hamaschil va'yered Hashem al Har Sinai. They're both true. There's one perspective and another. The resting of the Shechina that we speak of during Matan Torah was Isarusa de La'ela. It was from above. Ani hamaschil. God says, I will begin. Va'yered Hashem al Har Sinai. V'kiven shehayazeh mitzad l'mayla. And because it was initiated from above, so although at the moment of this happening, because Hashem came down on the mountain, therefore Hashem's presence was felt to such an extent that anybody that came close to the mountain was incinerated. Shesharsa Hakdusha Begashmi Shel Har Sinai, that Hashem's holiness and presence rested on the physical temporal mountain Har Sinai. But still, Mikol Makoim, but still in all, although that was true at that time, Bimshoich Hayovel, when the loud sound of the shofar ceased, Shehu Simon Siluk Shechina, which signaled that the Shechina departed, Hema Yalu Bahar. Then people could go up on the mountain. Hainu, Shahar Sinai Nishar Kimikoidem. This means that Har Sinai remained like it was before, Chayil, pedestrian, a regular mountain. Masha Enkain. In contradistinction, Hashras Hashchina b'Mishkan, the resting of Hashem's presence in the Mishkan, Haisa al Yedei va'asuli mikdash, was through the agency of mankind. You shall make for me a mikdash. Al Yedei asiyas b'nei Yisrael. B'nei Yisrael did this. Okemudgash b'kasav kan gam prate hamishkan v'kelim va'asu ves hamishkan ta'aseh. The Torah keeps underscoring humanity's overtures. They should make, they should construct, they should fashion. And because Hashem's Shechina came to rest through man's overtures, nikva'a hakdusha. Therefore, the holiness remained in a in a long-standing way, not in a temporary way. V'chefza hageshem shel hamishkan, and remained in the actual physical existence of the Mishkan. V'nishafsa kedusha b'mishkan v'chalkav, and it infused holiness into the Mishkan and all the aspects thereof. So you could say that when the Eibush came down on the mountain, yes, momentarily for that time, the mountain itself was transformed, but it was kind of like hit and run. Whereas when Bnei Yisrael built the Mishkan with their own kaiches, with their own materials, it created a situation in which Hashem came to rest, and this time it was bikfiyut. It was in a long-standing, I'm missing the word for kfiyut, if somebody could help me. Permanent, thank you. The Signan Teres HaChasidus. And now to say the same idea in the style of Chasidus, Ubeloshen HaMedrash now, as Chasidus explains the terminology of the Medrash we just referenced. Hashras Hashchina Shebashas Matan Torah Haisa Mitzad Lamaila. The resting of the Shechina that happened during Matan Torah was precipitated by that which is above. Va'ani hamaschel, Hashem initiated. Shen Nemar, like it says by Yered Hashem al Har Sinai. Hashem came down on Har Sinai. ומאחר שהמחובר בהעליונים ירדו לתחתונים הוא שהתחתונים יעלו לעליונים, שהעולם יהיה לדיר לא יסברך. And because the intention of Hashem coming down, of the upper strata coming down to the lower strata, is only for the purpose of tachtonim yalu l'elyonim, that the lower strata should be elevated to above, she'olam yeh l'dir lo yisbarach, that this world should become a dwelling place, a home for Hashem. And now the Rebbe says, and because ulamaila, and above, when you speak about Hashem, hare ein koyach chaser poya. By Hashem, it's not like by us that there's potential and there's actuality. By Hashem, ein koyach chaser poya. The potential itself is not missing, meaning there's no difference between potential and actuality. It's all already encapsulating the potential. So if that's Hashem's intention, then that already happens. So nasu hatachtainim dir lo yisbarach. So therefore, when Hashem came down, the world itself became a dira for Hashem. V'lachein matzinu, and therefore we found shahakol daseres hadibras ba mikol arba ruchos ha'olam ha'mishmayim ba'aretz, and therefore we find that the sound of Laseres Hadibras was surround sound. It came from all four directions. It came from heaven. It came from earth. Hainu shemitzias ha'olam, the very existence of the world, sa'aka, screamed godliness, v'hechriza, and announced al inyan anochi Hashem elikacha. So what's the difference between that and Va'asuli Mikdash? If, when we talk about Hashem, Ein Kayach Chatzer Payel, if by Hashem there's no difference between potential and action, and the whole reason that Hashem came down was so that this world should become a Dir Lo Yisbarach, so then what was added by making the Mishkan? But the Rebbe says, "Avol harei shleimus hakavana hi," but the fulfillment of Hashem's intention, shahatachtonim yiyu l'dir lakadosh baruch hu, that this lower strata should be a dwelling place for Hashem, lo rak al yedei hapoyel hamisave mitzad koicha yizbarach she'ena chaser poel. But the fulfillment of Hashem's intention is not that this should come about through his overtures, not through his potential that is already not missing actuality. Why? Because then what have we contributed? Where is our contribution? What the Eibishter wants is asiyas hatachton. The Eibishter wants the making of the lower place. But what is constructed in the lower strata should be constructed by the lower strata. That the Eibishter should make this into a dir lo yisbarach is not a chachma. And it's not what the Eibishter desired. But that we of the lower realm should transform the lower realm. That the Eibishter wanted. So this is the novelty. And this is the additional factor of the Mishkan over Matan Torah. That the drawing down of Hashem's presence among us should come through our avodah. Al yedei va'asu li mikdash. You shall make for me a mikdash. Ubazeh, and once we understand what the Eibishter wanted, now we're in a position to understand. Ubazeh yuvan hatam. We understand the reason. Shehiktim hakosov as inin v'yichuli truma. Now we're in a position to understand why the order of the psukim in our parsha appear as they do. First, you shall take from me an offering. Ki inyan zeh, because this concept, shahashras hashchina b'mishkan ba al yedei avodas Yisrael, this concept that the Shechina comes down only through the avodah of Bnei Yisrael, this actually comes to full expression dafka through the idea of truma. And now the Rebbe is going to explain truma. Betruma shnei perushim. In the term truma, there are two things we have to understand. There are two definitions. Aleph, Perish, Rashi, like Rashi explains, hafrasha. The term truma means to separate, to take something from a larger thing and to separate a portion from a larger mass. And then truma also connotes harama, elevation, like Raimu Hashem. Ubeis pirushim elu. And both of these explanations, hakshurim zebazeh, which are intertwined, which are connected, ein in yanam rak hesber, shaharama min ha'olam v'yanam zav v'chesed v'gamil elokus nefeles al yidei avodas ha'adam. It's not just explaining that apportioning, separating, elevating something from this world, whether it's gold or silver, to godliness, is done through a person's overture. Ella yesh bahem gam tir shel oifen ha'avodah ba'aliyah. It doesn't just generally speak to the notion of a person's actions and a person's efforts, but it speaks to the very specific way in which we elevate something to Hashem. Tevas truma, the word truma, hafrasha, to separate, to apportion. Madgisha underscores she'ein ha'adam noisein kol ma shetachas yadai elohu mafrish chelek minichasav. The first thing it teaches us is that by definition, the word truma is about separating a part rather than taking everything you have. So Rebbe says, first of all, you're separating a part. The es hamufrash harehu merim, And then you take what you separated and you pick it up, you elevate it. Noisen likvayha, you put at elevation, lahakadosh baruch hu, you give it to God, li l'shmi, to Hashem. So we can all really immediately embrace this idea that when you decide you want to do something, baby steps. And in this itself, we can now understand the difference between the two ways that the Medrash says the Shekhinah came down. Matan Torah versus the building of the Mishkan. Kasher ha'hamshacha hi mitzad l'mayla ki b'matan Torah, azay hashroas hashchina hi ba'ofen shava b'chol chelkei olam. When it's from the top down, when you're talking about bringing down the Shekhinah from above, like during Matan Torah, then it comes down in a way that equally pervades and saturates all the aspects of the world. Masha Inkain, a contradistinction, but when the resting of Hashem Shekhinah is effectuated through the work that is done below, through the building of the Mishkan, then there is variation, there's gradation. There's a difference because it has to do with how much your heart, each person's heart, will donate. And people are not the same. Everybody will give in a different way, in a different amount. And so when it's from the bottom up, it's going to unfurl in various ways. Minakal el kaved. And it's going to go from what's easier to what's more difficult. Why? Because it's medubar b'tachtainim she'enam b'telim le'lokus. Because you're talking about the lower strata, and the lower strata does not, at least in an obvious, manifest way, abnegate itself to godliness. Va'adam ba'avoidasai mafresh mehem. We're going to go back to the parentheses. Va'adam ba'avoidasai mafresh mehem chelek min ha'olam u'merimai u'magbir lakadosh baruch hu. And so, in this trajectory of a person's overture, a person separates a part of what belongs to them in this world and elevates it and to Hashem. Now go back to the parentheses. And the Rebbe cites the very well-known teaching, the very well-known clause, tefasta meruba lo tefasta. When you try to grab too much, we've all been there, we've all done that, we've taken too much cutlery to go set the table at one time, too many plates out of the cupboard, etc., etc. Too many carrots, it just falls. It's not worth it. Tafasta meruba loy tafasta. So the Rebbe says, so when the hashras hashchina comes from the bottom up, when it comes through the overture of humanity, it's going to be little by little. And then hopefully we're consistent and we go up higher and higher. And we separate and we elevate additional things. And these things are more difficult for us to elevate and they're more heavy. Until we come to a place through our avodah that the whole world becomes a dir le'yifgar. Now, and the distinction that cited above, it's not just in the order of how this is done, minakal ela kaved, etc. Ela hadavar bali de bitui gam ba'oifin habitul hanifal al yidei hashras hashchina. But the difference between the hashras hashchina coming from Hashem's overture as opposed to ours also expresses itself in the eventual abnegation of the physical that is affected through Hashem's Shechina resting. Kasher hadavar ba mitzad l'mayla, when it's precipitated from above, harei hu poyel bitul b'mtzius ha'olam, then it affects an absolute abnegation of the existence of the world. Ki gilui hashchina einoi noisen makam l'mtzius she'eino elokos, because the untrammeled revelation of the Shekhinah does not give space, it doesn't give place for things that are not godly. Wow. It just hit me that the very contemporary term to hold space is actually, look, Eina Noisen Makan. Doesn't give place, doesn't give space. I don't know, I never realized that. Okemaimer Chazal, Gam Gabe Matan Torah, like Chazal teach us regarding Matan Torah, Tzipor Leitzavach, a bird didn't chirp, Shor Leiga'a, an ox didn't bellow. The entire world was subsumed in Elokus. Masha Inke, in contradistinction, Habitul Shemitzad Ashras Ashchina Nifal Alidei Avodah Supulas Ha'adam, Ubefrat Betchilas Havodah Bereshis Binyan Hamishkan. But when you're talking about Hashem's resting through a person's overtures, and especially at the beginning of building the Mishkan, who inin shel hafrasha bilvad, you're talking about taking off a portion. Ha'adam mafresh mimitzi usay umoiser zayis merim zayis l'mala mimtzius Hashem. A person takes off a portion and raises it and gives it over to Hashem. Aval ein ze ba'ofen shel bitul betachlis ushlila shel etzem mitziyosai. But this is not in a way where that person is completely abnegated. It doesn't obviate their existence. Because a person can never obviate his existence completely. It's just not in our toolbox. It's not in our wheelhouse. We can't do that. We cannot self-abnegate completely. More generally, the Rebbe says, B'matan Torah bitul hatachton. With the giving of the Torah, there was the abnegation of the tachton, of the lower strata. Ba'asiyas ha-mishkan. In the construction of the Mishkan, there was his dachachos hatachton. There was the refinement of the lower strata. Let's just review that again. You see how the words matan and asiyas are underscored? Matan means the giving. It's an overlay from above. So when you superimpose something from above, then you abnegate the below. But asiyas, when you construct it painstakingly, little by little by little, then you refine it. So to take there must be better, much better examples, but let's say you're trying to teach a child something, yeah, you could tell them what the answer is to the mathematical problem that they have. But really you're shutting down their effort. So it's like matan Torah, but it's the abnegation of their effort. But the asiya is to sit with them and work it through, and it's going to be messy and there's going to be mistakes, but it's going to refine them. It's going to stick with them. It's going to elevate them. They learned something.
Rivky, can I say a word?
Sure, please.
I'm so emotional. The sikha, it's unbelievable. It's such a remarkable sikha. It's telling us that everything that we give, and you know what they gave were things of avodas that were used for avodah zarah. It was things that were, I mean, this was from Mitzrayim. and it was melted down. But nevertheless, all the donations, a lot of them came from schmutz. And when it's so remarkable, I wonder, all the things we give in our life, and then we go back and we think we didn't do it right, or we did do it right. No, this is, I don't know, this is the sikha. Everything you give, maybe at some point as a teenager, you didn't elevate it to, and you have guilt that you only did it 20%. You understand what I'm saying? This is a sikha talking to everything that we have given in life with schmutz and everything else. And sometimes we live with such guilt. We weren't the best mothers. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. But this is all der b'tachteinu. This is v'shachanti b'seichel. It would be fascinating to know what every donation stands for and how it was elevated by donating it to the, I wonder if there's anything on that. But think about it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is a remarkable thing. If we could focus on every gift that we gave, unless instead of everything we did wrong with the gift that we gave, the guilt of mothering, the guilt of relationship, the guilt of, if we could just look at it as a donation, and over time, it gets elevated. And when we look back and say, we need to do this better, there is another elevation. Maybe we would look at our lives with Sameach B'chelkai. Just a thought.
It's a
That's
remarkable
incredible
thought,
what you
Esther. Thank you for elevating the whole thing for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's really, really incredible what you said, but I have another question. How does what we're learning here fit in with the model of Mesiras Nefesh, which would be the opposite, really, of giving a little bit?
I don't think it's saying, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because when the Rebbe says that when it's an overture from below, it's incremental, even in it being incremental, it could still be with a lot of Mesiras Nefesh. It could be that whatever you give is so hard for you, and you give way more than you can. But it's still, Kolzman, that it's human, it's still going to be incremental.
But there are times when you're asked to give a lot, not start with a little.
But it's still in all not matan Torah. It's still not like something that is so overwhelming that it abnegates you completely.
Maybe that's not what the Rebbe also, maybe Terumah is not about the one doesn't negate the other. One, it's not a contradiction, but maybe the focus here is on the element of living with what we have. Mesiras Nefesh, we should feel like it, but chas v'sholom, to live a life of constantly living in Mesiras Nefesh, either you have to be a tzaddik or you live in, it's traumatic, it's trauma. Mesiras Nefesh is trauma. You have to be willing to give. But to live a life of Mesiras Nefesh, a tzaddik gomer, I understand, but everybody else who has a Yetzer Hara, that's trauma. Well, you have to want it. That's what the Tanya says. You have to want it. You have to be willing. But I think what Terumah is telling us, how do you live? How do you live in a positive, and how do you create a positive environment of b'shachanti b'seichel? And yet we are with our Yetzer Hara. You give a little bit, you give as much as you can, you give even more. The women gave more than the men. The women, I mean, they gave first, whatever you want to, however they gave it. But you give. What you have left, wonderful. You still have a Yetzer Hara, but give the little bit, the much. In the end, it's collective. And that is the total picture of Mesiras Nefesh in life. You understand what I'm? Anyway, whatever. I guess
Esther, I just wanted to comment on one. I just wanted to comment on one word you said, that will be Sameach B'chelkai. So I think the Rebbe would say on those words, Sameach B'chelkai, that because we would be besimcha with what we gave, it would prompt us and give us the kaiches to do what you just said now, to give more.
There you go, right.
Not
You're-
sameach bechalka like in the gashmistic sense of whatever you have you're happy with, but it's the like you so brilliantly said, it's the regret and the guilt that drags you down. And in that place, it's so hard to give.
Right, that's excellent, because you see by Hasana, the joy is so great that you just give without thinking, you spend without cheshbon. You're right, excellent point, Rivky, excellent point.
Zion. V'zehu hatam shakosov meine es kol yud gimel or tesvav protei hadvarim shebetruma l'mlechas hamishkan. And that is the reason that the pasuk enumerates all 13 or 15, depending on the shita, of the different materials that were necessary for the construction of the Mishkan. Ki ba'avodas ha'adam la'asais minyonei ha'olam dir lo yisbarach kol chelik ba'olam yesh bai oifim mesuyam mishaloi shel avoda va'aliyah. Esther hinted at this earlier. She said it would be fascinating to know what each material actually stood for. The Rebbe says because in the avoda of each person, to make from the aspects of this world into a dira, each aspect of this world has a particular way in which this has to be done, particular way in which it's elevated. V'hu suk truba b'fnei atzma, hein b'hafrasha v'hein b'harama. Now the Rebbe is delineating that there are actually two aspects in truma. You have to separate it, and then you have to elevate it. The Rebbe says now we circle back to answer the question of why the Torah begins with the idea of truma before the Torah says the words "make me for me a mikdash." And that's why the name of the parsha is Truma. Ki ikar ha'inyan v'hachidush b'parshasenu hu hatachlis the dir b'tachtonim. Because the main concept, the main novelty in our parsha is the goal of dir b'tachtonim, b'vinyan ha'mishkan, hanifeles al yedei avodas u'po'olas ha'adam, which, as the Rebbe has taught us in this whole sikha, is effectuated through the avodah of humankind. Shesidra minakal elakoved, and the order is from the light again to the heavy. Hafrasha utruma tchila. First, you have to separate it. Then you have to elevate it. V'rak la'achrei mekadesh, and only then does it become sanctified. It seems that each one of these levels is avodah b'fnei atzma. It's just to separate it, even if you're not elevating it yet and you haven't sanctified yet, just to separate an aspect is already difficult. And it's only through this that Hashem's kavanah for the creation of this universe is fulfilled. And this is the inyan of Truma, Dahainu, meaning Hashras, Hashchina, Al Yidei Hafrasha, Ha'adam, Ba'ayfan Hanal, that the Shechina comes down to rest through our separating. This is after Shechina came down through Matan Torah, where Hashem initiated, but this is Mitzad Avodas Ha'adam. But now this coming down of the Shechina is through the agency of man's work and toil. And it's only through this, and the Rebbe is mitzatet in footnote 74, famous Maimarim, that it's only through this that the Ikar, the main Shechina, comes down. Move on, and through this is understood. Shem haparsha hu truma. And now we can appreciate why the name of the parsha is Truma. Ki hashlemus v'hamayla shall call eser hatrumas, because the completion and the superlative attribute of all the 10 trumas in the Torah, he be'inyan hatruma kafi shehu ba l'dei bitui b'parshasenu, is actually encapsulated in the idea of the offering, the truma, that comes to expression in our parsha. Bitruma hafrasha v'harama. the separating and the elevation, zu, sheba nasa mishkan, through which was made the mishkan, through which hashras hashchina al yidei pu'ulas v'avodas adam, through which came the resting of the Shechina, dafka through human overture. And now we can explain another thing. Now we're in a position to understand why the building of the Mishkan and the construction of the Mishkan for itself, not as a preparation, not as a placeholder, not as a segue into building the Beis Hamikdash, hu inyan nitzchi. The building of the Mishkan itself is an everlasting, eternal thing. Kivan shahat Torah hi nitzchis, because it's part of Torah, and the Torah itself is eternal. Now, something meichedik is coming. Meichedik alert, coming up. Tam hadavar, the reason sha'az hutchal inin hatruma avodas hamata, the reason that it was with the building of the Mishkan that the inyan of truma, of separating and elevating the work from below started. Because this The Rebbe says it didn't start only because Matan Torah had come and gone, and after the blowing of the shofar, the sound of the shofar had ceased, which was a siman that the Shechina had gone up, and so you weren't able to feel the Shechina in a manifest way. So then there had to be a house for Hashem. That had to be step two, and they weren't yet in Eretz Yisrael, so they built a Mishkan. Rebbe says, no, that's not what's going on here. The reason why the whole idea of the fulfillment of the kavana of Hashem is with the Mishkan is mipnei shehaya zeh bamidbar. It's because this was in a desert. Midbar beruchni is hu makom umatzav asher lo yoshev adam ha'elyon shel hakisei sham. Rebbe says that al pi Chasidus, the idea of a midbar is a place and a situation in which the supernal man, one of the names that Hashem is referenced by is Adam Elyon. So it's a place where Adam Elyon doesn't sit, as it were. Hainu, meaning she'ini di yashav. What does the term to sit mean? Spiritually means gilui elikus. It means the revelation of godliness. And a midbar is a place she'ena miskayim sham, that a revelation of godliness doesn't occur there. Masha enke, in contradistinction, ear. What does a city connote? It connotes Moshav, a place that is of habitation, a place where people not only they settled there. He makam sheyesh b'gilui elikus. So spiritually, this connotes a place where Hashem is revealed. Yashav Adam Elyon Sham, supernal man settled there, revealed there. Ubechlalos, and generally speaking, zeu achiluk bein hamishkan lebeis hamikdash b'Yerushalayim. And generally speaking, this is the difference between the Mishkan and the Batei Mikdash in Yerushalayim. Beis Hamikdash nivna la'achar shebo Yisrael el hamnucha el hanachala. The Beis Hamikdash was built after the Jews came to their rest, to their inheritance. Mishayatzu min hamidbar, they left the midbar, ubo l'makayim moishav b'nei adam, and they came to a place that is inhabited by people. Uvnuhu be'eretz Yisrael, and they built the Batei Mikdash in Eretz Yisrael, she'aleha ne'emar, and where did they build it? Not just in any place that is habitable, but they built it in Eretz Yisrael, about which the Torah says, Tamid eni Hashem elokecha b'mereishis hashana v'da'achris hashana, that Hashem's eyes are always upon Eretz Yisrael. Ube'eretz Yisrael gufa b'Yerushalayim, and in Eretz Yisrael itself, where did they build it? They built it in Yerushalayim. Makom shel yiras shalem, shleimus hayira. Yerushalayim is called Yerushalayim because that is where there is complete awe and reverence of Hashem. Ubi Yerushalayim atzma, and in Yerushalayim itself, b'makam shehu shar Hashemayim, in the place that is the gate to heaven. V'lachein, and therefore, Inyan Hamikdash, Hadir Latzmusai, the whole idea of a mikdash, which is an apartment, a dwelling place for Hashem's essence, Hanasa Midvarim Tachtainim, that's constructed of material things from below, Hu Pa'ula She'ena Ba Kula Mitzad Avodas Ha'adam. But because it's built in Eretz Yisrael, and it's built in Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim it's built on Har HaBayis, which is Shar Hashemayim. So even though it's built below, and even though it's built of materials from below, it is not a pa'ula, it is not a project that is done entirely on the part of human beings. Elagam mitzad asher efchar. But it is because Hashem chose that place. It's mitzad habchira v'hakdusha elakis hashayrabay v'oise muchshar yose liyos klila lakos. It's because that Hashem chose it, and by choosing it, Hashem vested it with holiness, a godliness that rests there, and makes it an appropriate or more appropriate place to be a conduit, a vessel for godliness. So no matter what human overture that was involved, in the main, its holiness is still predicated on Hashem's bechira, on the fact that Hashem chose it, and therefore it became infinitely holy. Masha Enkein, in contradistinction, Hamidbar Eina Moshev Adam. The Midbar is a place that is not Moshev Adam. It's not a place where Hashem is revealed. It's not at all a place that is appropriate or apt to be a vessel, a conduit for godliness. But on the contrary, Zeu Midbar Amim. It's a desert that is populated by the other nations, each of which is a different klipa. Nachash, Sarah, Va'akra, V'tzimayin, Asher Eimayim. Snakes, serpents, scorpions. Thirst, place where there's no water. Water is, of course, always a metaphor for Torah. V'lachein, and therefore, Asiyas HaMishkan Sham, making the Mishkan Dafka there, Asiyas Dira Sham, Lakadosh Baruch Hu, He Mitzad Avodas Ha'adam Mitzchila Va'at Soif. It's all about man's overtures. It's all ba'ofen shel Terumah. It's our painstaking separation, bit by bit, and elevation, and construction, and sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back. V'lachein dafka mimikdash hamidbar, and so therefore, it's specifically through the mikdash that was built in the midbar, yeshna ha'hira nesinas kayach asher gam bisman hagolus, and therefore all the details of the construction of the Mishkan, and therefore it's dafke the Mishkan that gives us the lesson and gives us the kayches in our time, in our golus, in our midbar. Kasher eisesenu loira inu, our eyes do not see all of the Giluyim, all of the things that were revealed. Bamidbar am shebizmanenu, in the midbar that we are in right now, populated by so many different nations, cultures, ideas, isms. She'ein nira b'shum gilui elokus. Sometimes it feels like there's no revelation of godliness. And it's a doubled and doubled darkness. Dafka from the Mishkan, we learn that we have the koyach to do the same thing. and that this is actually the quintessential fulfillment of Hashem's desire. Al pi hanal yuvon gam hatam shatzivui al binyan hamishkan nilmad min hamishkan dafka. And now we're in a position to understand why the tzivui to build the Batei Mikdash, which would seem to eclipse the Mishkan in terms of their greatness and their stature, why was this learnt out of the tzivui to build a Mishkan? Rashi tells us it alludes to it. Hachidush shebahashras hashchina shebemikdash legabe matan Torah hu b'zeh shehadavar nifal mitzad avodas ha'adam. But the Rebbe says, as explained before, the novelty of what happened with Hashem resting His Shechina, the Mikdash, vis-a-vis Matan Torah, comes from the fact that this was created through the work of humanity. And this is especially obvious and highlighted not in the Batei Mikdash, as the Rebbe just said, which was built in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, on Har HaBayis, b'Makam Asher Evchar. Really, the holiness came from Hashem choosing it. But here, the Mishkan highlights in a very open and clear and manifest way this what the Eibishter wanted. And therefore, because it's so revealed when it comes to the Mishkan, we learn from this that this was actually what Hashem wanted most out of the Mikdash. This was the most important aspect. As diuk lashon harambam, and through this we can explain, the Rebbe says, a Hasidic explanation on the specificity of the Rambam's terminology when he speaks about the fact that every person has an obligation to be part of building the Batei Mikdash. He says, "V'hakol chayavin livnois u'lisa'ed ba'atzmon." Everybody has a chiyuv to build and to assist by themselves, u'b'mimaynim, and with their money, anoshim v'noshim, men and women, mikdash hamidbar, like in the Mishkan of the desert. Shediyeh karambam b'halacha zu. The Rambam is specifically in this halacha specifying likrai as hamishkan b'shem mikdash hamidbar, to call the Mishkan the mikdash hamidbar. Hagam shebahalacha shlefaneh, although in the earlier halacha she'abba niskar Mishkan, also earlier in the earlier halacha he's mentioning the Mishkan. Loy nakat halashon mikdash hamidbar, but he doesn't use this particular term, the mikdash in the desert. Inyan zeh shebebinyan beis hamikdash livnois u'lesaid ba'atzmon u'b'maynam avodas ha'adam ba'ofen shel terumah yisoidaihu v'hu budugmas mikdash hamidbar. With this, the Rambam wants to underscore that the idea of every person's obligation to be part of building the Beis Hamikdash, both, it seems, with their talent, with their strength, and with their money, with their resources, is based on and is sourced in the avodah for the Mishkan, which was in the modality of Terumah. Because remember, the Yichali Terumah comes before the Asuli Mikdash. Yisoidai hu bedugmas Mikdash Hamidbar. Asher yashav Adam Sham. And over there, the Adam Elyon, the supernal man, is not revealed. Makam she'ein lo shayches l'gilui elokus. Seemingly, this is a place where there is no connection to the revelation of godliness. Kach shehamishkan nasa ach v'rak al yedei avodas u'pu'ulas ha'adam. The Rambam, by inserting this term, Mikdash Hamidbar, is alluding to the fact that even when they built the Beis Hamikdash, it should be done based on the modality of the Mishkan, which was all about the avodah of the human being. V'zui gam ha'ira me'inyan ha'mishkan u'trumasei l'chol echad befrat u'bechol zman sheyimatzei boi. And this is the distinct lesson from the whole concept of the Mishkan and the Terumah for each person in every time. La'eis min ha'itim olul Yehudi lahargish bekir boi shenimtzahu b'maimud u'matzav shel midbar. From time to time, a person might feel within themselves like they're stranded in the desert. Asher lo yashav adam sham. No person is in this desert. Hainu, shekol inyan shebekdusha v'elokus eina b'vchinas yashav etzla rachman al-tzlan. They feel that kedusha, godliness, is not revealed within them. They don't feel aligned. They feel empty, barren, arid, Rahman al-Islam. And then a person could, God forbid, fall into despondency and give up hope. The Rebbe says, and from this comes the lesson, that there's such a thing as building the splendorous Beis Hamikdash in the Midbar. V'adarab, and on the contrary, Hatzivi v'asuli mikdash shchanti b'seichem huschol v'niskayim b'poil b'mishkan zeh b'eisha hayi Yisrael b'mayim b'matzav shel b'midbar. And we only learn about the Batei Mikdash from the Mishkan, because it really all starts with the Mishkan. And where was the Mishkan built? It was built in a Midbar. In other words, that the Mishkan that we build in the Midbar, that our overtures that come from a place where we feel like there are just all these snakes and scorpions surrounding us or filling our minds, and there's no water, and we're feeling dark and dank and arid. That's where the highest Mikdash was built. That's where the Mishkan was built. That's the whole kavanah. And through this, that a Jew makes a Mishkan, specifically in the matzav of a midbar, there is a light that emerges from the darkness that is even greater than the light that would come unimpeded. Until you will light to a level of midbar de kedusha. Usually a midbar is a place devoid of kedusha. But the Rebbe says, but when you, notwithstanding, feeling like you're in a place of midbar, devoid of kedusha, you still build that mishkan, then you come to a place called midbar de kedusha. Lefchinas kilei adam hu shelamayla mefchinas adam elyon. You come to a place that is so high that it is higher even than the designation of Adam Elyon, supernal man. In other words, it's such a high place that nothing could be there. It's higher than high. And that is what we come to through building the Mishkan, Davka, from a place of midbar. Davka from a place where we're feeling less than, imposter syndrome, whatever term you want to use. And we feel like it can't be done. And the Rebbe says that when we build the Mishkan from that place, we come to the Midbar de Kedusha. Now the mic is open for all of you. I'm going to open up the chat because I didn't have it open again. Maybe we can understand this description of Midbar as a reference to a place we feel ourselves in following Henya's passing. Does everybody have the, or should I read Vivi is saying maybe we could understand this description of Midbar as a reference to the place we feel ourselves in following Henya's passing and our efforts to move forward count all the more so. I don't think maybe, I think for sure. Above this, Vivi wrote, I think Esther's point underscores that guilt is toxic and is an opening for the Yetzer Hara like no other. As to Mesiras Nefesh, I heard from a chassid who learned in Lubavitch 100 years ago that Mesiras Nefesh is Mesiras Haratzin, giving our will, wanting to do it, wanting it. I think this underscores even more the value of the copper mirrors that the women brought. That's beautiful.
I think there's a lot of ideas of masculine and feminine in here, no? Like the overture of Hashem is like an Or Sovev, which is a masculine energy, and the overture of the Mishkan is an Or Mamale, the distinction, which is a feminine energy, and then like the basic idea of a male and female anatomy, that a woman has one egg, and there's this like a concrete time frame, a small little window, it's incremental, month after month, just one opportunity, and the masculine is an overflow of opportunity with no time frame connected to it, but it has to meet up, and that ultimately, I mean, at least what I'm personally reading in the Sikha, maybe editorializing, but ultimately it's this feminine energy which is going to bring us to the Midbar to Kedusha, which I thought about it throughout the Sikha, but especially when you had this idea of holding space, which it sounded like you thought of on the spot, I don't know, but that's,
Yeah, it just hit me, literally just hit me there.
I think that might be more of a feminine quality, this concept of holding space for other people, and the world is trying to, catch up to that, is trying to, employ that idea, because the go-to is the masculine, but as we're getting closer to Mashiach, there's a feminine energy like pervasive.
That's gorgeous. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very nice, Sippa. I think I was listening to you, Rivky, teaching us the Sikha. It seems to me, I don't know if this is correct, but it seems to me that the Mishkan is more the work of the Baal Tshuva, where the Beis HaMikdash is more the tzaddik of what the Rebbe was saying here. And that work of the Baal Tshuva, according to Tain, is everybody who's not a tzaddik, every single one of us. But the amazing thing is it actually has complete permanence, because everything in the Beis HaMikdash was saved. Every Terumah, everything that they built was saved forever. Beis HaMikdash, we don't have the Kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, but the Kelim of the Mishkan was completely saved. And it seems to me to be that the Mishkan work is the work of the Baal Tshuva. The Rosh V'Tovli, the Beinani, it's the work of the Baal Tshuva, and it's forever. And that is the preparation for the permanence of the Beis HaMikdash. Can't be it. It's an unbelievable sikha. I want to hang it on my refrigerator, not only for a week, just go for us for life. It is so remarkable. And it would really be amazing to learn each thing that was donated, the struggle that it is, and how it gets elevated by donating it. And it isn't everything. It's what your heart can give at the time, right? That's what the Eibishter asks for. And they gave much more than that. And first, maybe we need to look at life like that. We actually give more than we give ourselves credit for. And by the Eibishter, it has permanence. I don't know. It's a remarkable sikha.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rivky.
Orit is saying that with all of our truma, the Mishkan could only be built when Hashem put up the walls that Moshe couldn't do by himself. We still need siyata d'shmaya. Ain't that a fact? Yeah, we all need to marinate in all the different parts of the sikha for a long time. Esther, you gave us a home project idea. We could all just start putting the sikhas as wall coverings in our homes. Could you imagine how striking it would be? Everybody that came in would be able to see the sikhas that we learned and be able to see the parts that we underscore, and it would be something. Not just on the refrigerator.
You're right about that. Anyway, thank you, Rivky, very much.
Okay,
Wonderful.
wishing everybody a very wonderful week, a week of Harama, a week of Terumah. And the Eibusher should have Rachmanis on us and separate us out of this gullus and elevate us and take us home already.
And a good Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar.
Yes. To Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar, good Chodesh, and it should only be Simcha, B'tayv Hanir V'Hanigla.
Did you start
Matam Esar Tfachim.
getting over the flu at the beginning? Feel good?